Maid fainted, while working until the millionaire CO found a bandage on her face. What he did shocked everyone. The Sterling estate was the kind of place where perfection wasn't just expected, it was demanded. Every surface gleamed under crystal chandeliers, every corner was dusted to within an inch of its life, and every member of the household staff moved like ghosts through the halls, seen but never truly noticed. Among them was Clara Bennett, a maid whose gentle smile had become her armor against a world that had tried to break her too many times. She was 28 years old but carried the weariness of someone who'd lived twice as long. The small bandage on her left cheek, partially hidden by the way she angled her face downward when anyone looked her way, told only part of her story. The rest was written in the exhaustion behind her eyes, in the way her hands sometimes trembled when she thought no one was watching, in the careful way she moved through space, as if trying not to take up too much of it. This morning would change everything. This morning, the master of the house would return unexpectedly, and Clara's carefully constructed invisibility would shatter in the most unexpected way possible. What happened next would shock the entire household and teach them all a lesson about seeing the people right in front of them. Before we get into what happened, drop a comment right now telling me where you're watching from and what time it is in your location. And if this is your first time here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because the stories we share here aren't just entertainment, they're reminders that compassion can change everything. Now let's see what happened when Clara's world collided with Nathaniel Reeves, the billionaire CEO who was about to discover that some things matter more than profit margins and quarterly reports. Clara had been awake since 4 that morning. Her shift at the Sterling estate didn't start until 7, but she'd learned the hard way that sleep was a luxury she couldn't always afford. The laundromat where she worked nights didn't close until 2, and by the time she rode the bus home, showered, and tried to quiet her racing thoughts, it was usually past 3. 3 hours of sleep had become her normal, though normal didn't make it any less exhausting. She stood now in the grand foyer of the estate, polishing the brass handrail that curved up the sweeping marble staircase. The weight of the polishing cloth in her hand felt heavier than it should have. Everything felt heavier these days. The bucket of cleaning supplies at her feet, the uniform that hung a little looser on her frame than it had 6 months ago. Even the air itself seemed to press down on her shoulders like a physical thing. The estate had been her sanctuary when she first started working here 8 months ago. After fleeing from James, after spending 2 weeks sleeping in her car and showering at the YMCA, the job at Sterling Estate had felt like salvation. Mrs. Whitmore had hired her on the spot, barely asking questions beyond whether she could start immediately. Clara had said yes without hesitation, grateful for steady work and a reason to get up in the morning. The other staff members had been kind at first. In that distant way, people are kind to newcomers they don't expect to last. Most maids quit within the first month. The work was demanding, the standards impossible, and Mr. Reeves had a reputation for noticing every flaw. But Clara had stayed. Where else would she go? This job, combined with her night shifts at the laundromat, barely covered her rent and her mother's outstanding medical bills. But barely was better than nothing. "Clara, you look terrible." The voice belonged to Sophie, another maid who'd been working at the estate for 5 years. She was younger than Clara, maybe 23, with bright eyes that hadn't yet learned to dim themselves. "When's the last time you ate something?" Clara tried to remember. Breakfast yesterday? Or was that the day before? Time had a way of blurring together when you were running on fumes. "I'm fine," she said automatically, because that's what you said when people asked. That's what kept them from asking more questions you didn't want to answer. Sophie didn't look convinced. She set down her own cleaning supplies and came closer, lowering her voice. "You need to take better care of yourself. I know the pay here isn't great, but you can't work yourself to death. Mrs. Whitmore won't care if you collapse. She'll just hire someone else." It was true, and Clara knew it. She was replaceable. They all were. That's how places like this worked. The rich lived in their beautiful homes with their beautiful things, and people like Clara made sure everything stayed beautiful while remaining invisible themselves. It was a transaction, nothing more. But Sophie meant well, so Clara forced a smile. "I appreciate the concern. Really. I'm just tired today. I'll eat something on my break." That was a lie. Clara's break would be spent in the small staff bathroom, trying to rest her eyes for 15 minutes before getting back to work. Food cost money she didn't have, and even if she did, her stomach had gotten so used to being empty that eating sometimes made her feel worse. Sophie squeezed her arm gently before moving away to continue her own tasks. Clara watched her go, feeling a pang of something that might have been envy. Sophie lived with her parents still, had a boyfriend who took her out on weekends, seemed to float through life without the weight that Clara carried. But envy was pointless. Everyone had their own struggles. Just because you couldn't see them didn't mean they weren't there. Clara turned back to the staircase, her reflection catching in the polished brass. She looked away quickly. Mirrors had become her enemy. They showed too much. The hollow cheeks, the dark circles that makeup couldn't quite hide, the bandage on her face that screamed victim even though she was trying so hard to be a survivor. James had found her 3 days ago outside the laundromat. She'd been taking out the trash during her shift, and he'd appeared from the shadows like something from a nightmare. His hand had clamped around her jaw before she could scream, his fingers digging into her cheek hard enough to bruise. "Did you really think you could leave me?" he'd hissed, his breath hot against her ear. "Did you think I wouldn't find you?" Clara had frozen, terror locking her muscles. This was the man who'd promised to love her forever on their wedding day. The man who'd slowly revealed himself to be a monster in the privacy of their home. The man who'd put her in the hospital twice before she finally found the courage to run. "You belong to me," James had continued, his grip tightening. "I own you, and if you don't come back, I'll make sure you regret it. I know where you live now. I know where you work. You'll never be safe." Then he'd released her and vanished back into the darkness, leaving Clara shaking and bleeding from where his nails had broken the skin on her cheek. She'd cleaned herself up in the laundromat bathroom, covered the wound with a bandage she kept in her purse for emergencies, and finished her shift, because what else could she do? Calling the police would only make things worse. James always made things worse when you tried to fight back. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Whitmore, came sweeping through the foyer now, her heels clicking against the marble. She was a woman in her late 50s, with steel grey hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. "Ladies, Mr. Reeves is returning from Singapore this morning, 3 days early. I need this entire first floor spotless within the hour. Clara, you'll handle the foyer and the stairs. Sophie, the library. Move quickly, please." The announcement sent a ripple of tension through the gathered staff. Nathaniel Reeves wasn't cruel exactly, but he had standards that bordered on impossible. He noticed everything. A fingerprint on a window, a cushion positioned 2 inches off center, a flower arrangement that wasn't quite symmetrical. Under his watch, the Sterling estate ran like a Swiss watch, precise and unforgiving. Clara had only met Mr. Reeves twice in the 8 months she'd been working here. The first time had been during her interview, though calling it an interview was generous. Mrs. Whitmore had introduced her, and he'd glanced up from his laptop long enough to say, "Can you start Monday?" When Clara said yes, he'd nodded and gone back to work. The second time had been 3 months ago when she'd accidentally knocked over a vase while dusting the library. She'd braced for anger, for consequences, but he'd just looked at her calmly and said, "Accidents happen. Clean it up carefully so you don't cut yourself." His response had surprised her so much that she'd stood frozen for a moment before scrambling to obey. Most rich men she'd encountered, including James, who'd come from money, even if he'd squandered most of it, treated staff like they were less than human. But Mr. Reeves had seemed almost kind, or maybe just indifferent. Either way, he hadn't yelled, and that was more than Clara usually expected. She worked faster now, her movements efficient despite the way her vision occasionally swam at the edges. The marble gleamed under her attention, each step of the staircase reflecting the morning light that streamed through the tall windows. Beautiful. Everything in this house was beautiful, and Clara sometimes wondered what it would be like to live in a place like this, not as staff, but as someone who belonged. Someone who could walk down these stairs in an evening gown instead of a black uniform. Someone who didn't have to count pennies to make rent. But that kind of thinking was dangerous. It led to wanting things you couldn't have, and Clara had learned that wanting only led to disappointment. Better to keep your head down, do your work, and be grateful for what little you had. The other staff members moved around her in a choreographed dance of efficiency. Thomas, the butler, was checking the entrance hall mirror for spots. Marie and Lisa, two of the other maids, were arranging fresh flowers in the sitting room. Even the kitchen staff had been mobilized, preparing Mr. Reeves's preferred breakfast of black coffee, scrambled eggs, and wheat toast with honey. Everyone knew their role, everyone played their part, and Clara was determined to play hers perfectly, despite the dizziness that had been getting worse over the past hour. She just needed to get through the morning, then she could rest during her break, then she could make it through the afternoon, 1 hour at a time. That's how you survived. The sound of car tires on gravel made her heart jump. He was here. Mr. Reeves was back, and judging by the sudden flurry of activity from the other staff members, everyone was trying to look busy and competent and absolutely perfect. Clara moved to the edge of the foyer, positioning herself near the cleaning supplies. Invisible, that was the goal. Just blend into the wallpaper and let him pass without notice. She'd perfected the art of invisibility over the past 8 months. How to stand in a room without drawing attention, how to move silently, how to keep her eyes down and her expression neutral. Survival skills learned in a marriage that had taught her the cost of being noticed. The front door opened, and Nathaniel Reeves walked in like he owned the place. Which, of course, he did. He owned this estate, the company that bore his family name. 3 hotels, a chain of luxury restaurants, and probably half the city for all Clara knew. At 35, he'd built an empire that most people could only dream about. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair that was slightly too long for corporate standards, and grey eyes that seemed to catalogue everything they saw. He wore a dark suit that probably cost more than Clara made in 6 months, and he carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from never having to question his place in the world. There was something about him that Clara found both intimidating and oddly compelling. Maybe it was the way he moved with such certainty, or the intelligence that shone in his eyes, or the fact that despite his wealth and power, he'd never once raised his voice at the staff. "Welcome home, Mr. Reeves," Mrs. Whitmore said, stepping forward with a practiced smile. "Your trip was successful, I hope?" "Productive," he replied, his voice deep and measured. "The Singapore deal went through. We'll need to schedule a board meeting for next week to go over the details." "Of course, sir. I'll coordinate with your assistant. Is everything in order with the house?" Nathaniel's eyes swept the foyer, taking in every detail. The fresh flowers, the gleaming floors, the perfectly arranged furniture, and for a terrifying moment, those grey eyes landed on Clara. She felt pinned under his gaze, like a butterfly under glass. But then his eyes moved on, and she could breathe again. "Everything looks perfect," he said. "The staff has done well in my absence." Mrs. Whitmore preened slightly at the praise. "We maintain your standards always, sir. Now, shall I have your coffee sent to the study?" "Yes, please. And have Jensen bring my luggage up. I have calls to make, and I need to review the quarterly reports before the board meeting." He moved toward the stairs, his footsteps confident and sure. Clara pressed herself further against the wall, making herself smaller. Just let him pass. Just stay invisible. Just get through this moment. But her body had other plans. The dizziness that had been lurking at the edges of her consciousness suddenly surged forward like a wave. The edges of her vision went dark. The floor seemed to tilt sideways. She reached out for the banister to steady herself, but her hand missed, and suddenly she was falling. Time seemed to slow down. Clara felt her knees buckle, felt the bucket of cleaning supplies tip over, water splashing across the pristine marble floor. Felt herself hit the ground, though the impact seemed distant and unreal. She heard gasps, heard someone call her name, heard Mrs. Whitmore's sharp intake of breath that probably meant Clara's employment had just ended. And then there were hands on her shoulders, strong and steady, and a voice that cut through the fog. "Hey, can you hear me? Someone get water. Now." Clara forced her eyes open and found herself staring up at Nathaniel Reeves. He was kneeling beside her on the wet floor, one hand supporting her head, his expensive suit getting soaked. His face was creased with concern that looked genuine, and it didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. Why was the master of the house on the floor beside her? Why wasn't he angry about the spilled water and the disrupted morning. Why was he looking at her like she mattered? "I'm sorry," she whispered, "because that's what you said when you made a mess. I'm so sorry. I'll clean it up. I'll fix it. Please don't fire me. I need this job. Don't worry about that right now. Can you sit up? Take it slow." He helped her into a sitting position, his hands gentle but firm. Clara's head spun, and she had to close her eyes for a moment to keep from getting sick. When she opened them again, Nathaniel was studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. That's when his eyes caught on the bandage covering her left cheek. His expression shifted, the concern deepening into something harder to read. Something that looked almost like recognition, or perhaps pain. "What happened here?" he asked, his fingers hovering near but not touching the bandage. Clara's mind raced. She needed an explanation, something believable, something that wouldn't lead to more questions. "I fell," she said automatically. "Clumsy. I'm really sorry. I'm fine. I just haven't been sleeping well." But Nathaniel wasn't looking at her face anymore. He was looking at the way she held herself, the way she instinctively angled her body away from him, the way her hands shook, the way fear flickered in her eyes despite her attempts to hide it. Clara had seen that look before, on the face of the emergency room doctor who treated her the second time James put her in the hospital. That look that said, "I know you're lying, but I can't force you to tell the truth." Nathaniel stood abruptly and turned to Mrs. Whitmore, who was hovering nearby with a glass of water and an expression that suggested this was a massive inconvenience. "Who did this to her?" His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight that made everyone in the foyer freeze. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean, sir," Mrs. Whitmore said stiffly. "Clara mentioned she had a clumsy accident at home. These things happen with the staff. They work multiple jobs, get overtired, and accidents occur." "Clumsy accident." Nathaniel repeated the words like they tasted bad. He looked back at Clara, who was trying to stand on shaking legs. Sophie had rushed over to help support her, and Clara was grateful for the assistance, even as she felt mortified by all the attention. "When's the last time you ate?" Nathaniel asked Clara directly. Clara's mind went blank. She honestly couldn't remember. Yesterday morning? The day before? Food had become such a low priority when rent was due, and her mother's medical bills kept arriving like clockwork, even though her mother had been gone for 6 months. "I had breakfast," she said, but even to her own ears it sounded like a lie. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He turned back to Mrs. Whitmore. "Call Dr. Harrison. Tell him to meet us at St. Michael's Hospital. Emergency entrance." Mrs. Whitmore's expression shifted to shock. "Sir, I really don't think that's necessary. The girl just needs some rest and perhaps a proper meal. We can handle this internally without making a fuss." "I wasn't asking for your opinion." The cold edge in Nathaniel's voice could have cut glass. Every person in the foyer seemed to take a collective step back. Clara had never heard him sound like that before. Cold, dangerous, like he was barely holding back anger that wanted to explode outward. "Someone bring my car around, now." Thomas the butler practically ran to comply. The other staff members stood frozen, not sure what to do or where to look. This wasn't how things were supposed to work. Rich men didn't take their maids to hospitals. They certainly didn't get their $1,000 suits wet, kneeling on floors beside sick employees. The household erupted into motion, but it all felt surreal to Clara. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of fever dream brought on by exhaustion and malnutrition. Billionaire CEOs didn't care about their staff beyond whether they showed up on time and did their jobs. That's how the world worked. That's how it had always worked in Clara's experience. But Nathaniel Reeves apparently didn't care about how things were supposed to work. He bent down and, with surprising gentleness considering his obvious anger, lifted Clara into his arms. She made a weak sound of protest, but he ignored it completely. "You can barely stand. Stop arguing." Clara's face burned with embarrassment as he carried her toward the front door. Every member of the household staff was staring now, their faces reflecting various degrees of shock and confusion. She could see the questions in their eyes, the speculation. By tomorrow, every staff member in every wealthy house in the city would know about this. The gossip mill that connected domestic workers moved faster than any social media platform. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to be anywhere but here, being carried like a child by a man who probably thought she was pathetic, weak. Just another sob story in a world full of people who couldn't take care of themselves. "I can walk," she tried again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sure you can," Nathaniel said, not breaking his stride. "But you're not going to. When's the last time you saw a doctor?" Clara couldn't answer that. Medical care cost money she didn't have. She'd been to the emergency room after James hurt her, but only because concerned neighbors had called an ambulance. Since leaving him, she'd dealt with everything herself. A first aid kit from the dollar store and prayer had become her healthcare plan. His car was waiting, a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than Clara would make in her lifetime. The driver, a man named Jensen who Clara had seen around the estate but never spoken to, had already opened the back door. Nathaniel slid in with Clara still in his arms, arranging her carefully on the leather seat before taking the spot beside her. "St. Michael's Hospital," he told Jensen. "Emergency entrance, fast but safe." As the car pulled away from the estate, Clara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She didn't understand what was happening, didn't understand why this man, who barely knew she existed, was treating her like she mattered. It didn't fit with everything she'd learned about powerful people, about men who could hurt you with their indifference even if they never raised a hand. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I'm just a maid. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the passing city. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before but no less intense. "Because someone needs to," he said. "And because I'm guessing that bandage on your face didn't come from a clumsy accident any more than your exhaustion comes from just working hard. Someone hurt you, and whoever it was, they don't get to keep doing it." Clara's breath caught. He saw through her lie that easily. She opened her mouth to deny it, to insist she was fine, but the words wouldn't come. What was the point? He already knew. And something about the way he said it, without pity but with a kind of quiet fury on her behalf, made her defenses start to crumble. "I don't know what you mean," she tried weakly. "Yes, you do." He turned to look at her directly, and there was something in his grey eyes that made Clara want to trust him, even though trust was a luxury she'd learned she couldn't afford. "And when you're ready to tell me the truth, I'll listen. No judgment, no pressure, just listening. But right now, we're going to make sure you're okay physically. Everything else can wait." The hospital appeared before Clara could form a response. Jensen pulled up to the emergency entrance, and Nathaniel was out of the car before it fully stopped, helping Clara out with the same careful attention he'd shown at the estate. The emergency room was busy with the usual morning chaos, people with various injuries and illnesses waiting to be seen, nurses moving efficiently between patients, doctors reviewing charts and calling names. But the moment Nathaniel walked in carrying Clara, something shifted. Maybe it was the expensive suit. Maybe it was the way he carried himself. Maybe someone recognized him. Either way, a nurse appeared immediately. "We need a doctor," Nathaniel said, his tone brooking no argument. "This woman collapsed due to what appears to be severe exhaustion and malnutrition. I want a full examination." The nurse took one look at Clara's pale face and the bandage on her cheek and nodded. "Right this way, sir." They were taken to a private examination room almost immediately, bypassing the waiting area entirely. Clara felt guilty about that. There were people who'd been waiting longer, people who probably needed help more urgently, but Nathaniel didn't seem concerned with fairness or protocol. He just wanted her taken care of, and apparently he had the money and influence to make that happen immediately. A doctor appeared within minutes, a kind-looking woman in her 50s with gentle hands and concerned eyes. "I'm Dr. Martinez," she said. "Can you tell me what happened?" Clara launched into her prepared story about being clumsy and not sleeping well and maybe coming down with something, but Dr. Martinez's expression suggested she'd heard variations of this story many times before. The doctor examined Clara carefully, noting her underweight frame, her dehydration, the bruising on her wrist that Clara had forgotten to cover, and of course the bandage on her face. "Would you mind if I looked at your cheek?" Dr. Martinez asked gently. Clara nodded, and the doctor carefully removed the bandage. The wound underneath had healed somewhat over the past 3 days, but the marks were still clearly visible. 4 crescents where fingernails had dug in, the shape of fingers pressed hard enough to bruise. Dr. Martinez's expression tightened, but her voice remained gentle. "Clara, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that this is a safe space. Whatever you tell me stays between us, unless you want otherwise. Did someone do this to you?" Clara felt Nathaniel's presence behind her, solid and protective. She wanted to lie, wanted to keep her secrets close because telling made things real, made her a victim instead of a survivor. But she was so tired of lying, so tired of carrying everything alone, so tired of pretending she was fine when she was slowly falling apart. "My ex-husband," she heard herself whisper. "James, he found me 3 days ago. He grabbed my face and told me I'd never really get away from him." The words hung in the air, and Clara waited for judgment or pity or any of the other reactions she'd learned to expect when people found out you were the kind of woman who let herself get hurt. But Dr. Martinez just nodded like Clara had confirmed something she'd already suspected. "Has he hurt you before?" the doctor asked. "Yes." Clara's voice was barely audible. "That's why I left. But he won't stop. He says I belong to him." Behind her, Clara felt Nathaniel's presence shift. Not away from her, but like he was physically restraining himself from doing something. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Where does he live?" "I don't know anymore. We lived together when we were married, but after I left, he moved. He just shows up sometimes, finds me somehow, makes threats and then disappears before I can call the police. Even if I did call them, what would they do? He hasn't technically done anything illegal enough to arrest him." "Assault is illegal," Nathaniel said flatly. "Harassment is illegal. Stalking is illegal. And if the police won't help, then we'll find someone who will." Dr. Martinez looked between them, then focused on Clara. "I'm going to admit you for observation. You're severely dehydrated and malnourished. You need fluids and rest, and honestly, you need somewhere safe to recover. Does your ex-husband know where you live?" Clara nodded miserably. "He said he knows where I work and where I live. He said I'd never be safe." "Then we'll make sure you are safe," Nathaniel said, and there was steel in his voice. "I have resources, lawyers, security, connections. We're going to get a restraining order, and we're going to make sure it's enforced, and you're not going back to wherever you've been living until we can be certain it's secure." Clara turned to look at him fully for the first time since they'd arrived at the hospital. "Why are you doing all this? You don't even know me. I'm just someone who works in your house. Why do you care?" Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. His grey eyes held old pain, the kind that came from experiences that shaped you in ways you could never fully shake. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but heavy with emotion. "When I was 7 years old, I watched my mother try to hide a black eye from the social worker who came to check on us. She said she'd walked into a door. The social worker didn't believe her. I could see it in her face, but she couldn't prove anything without my mother's cooperation. So she left. And my father kept hitting my mother, and my mother kept making excuses, until finally the state took me away because they decided the environment was unsafe for a child." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be willing to accept help." Nathaniel's expression was intense. "My mother died 5 years after they took me away from her. She never left my father, never accepted the help that people tried to offer, never believed she deserved better, and I've spent my entire adult life wondering if things could have been different if someone had intervened more forcefully, if someone had given her resources and protection instead of just sympathy and concern." He leaned forward, his voice urgent. "So when I see someone in a situation like yours, someone who's clearly in danger but trying to handle everything alone, I don't walk away. I can't. Maybe I'm trying to save my mother retroactively, or maybe I'm just trying to be the person I wish had existed for her. Either way, I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere until you're safe. That's a promise." Clara felt something shift in her chest. Something that had been locked tight for months started to loosen. This man who barely knew her was offering help not because he wanted something from her, but because he understood what it was like to watch someone suffer and feel powerless to stop it. He wasn't seeing her as a charity case or a victim to be pitied. He was seeing her as a person who deserved protection, who deserved safety, who deserved better than what she'd been given. "Okay," she whispered, tears streaming down her face now. "Okay, I'll accept help. I'll let you help me. I'm so tired of doing everything alone." Nathaniel's expression softened, and for just a moment, Clara saw past the billionaire CEO to the scared 7-year-old boy who'd watched his mother suffer. "You're not alone anymore," he said simply. "We're going to fix this. Together." Dr. Martinez gave them both a gentle smile. "I'm going to get the paperwork started for your admission. Clara, a nurse will be in shortly to get you set up with fluids and run some tests. Mr. Reeves, I assume you'll want to stay with her?" "Yes," Nathaniel said without hesitation. "I'll stay as long as she wants me here." Clara couldn't quite believe this was real, but as the doctor left and a nurse came in to start an IV, as Nathaniel pulled a chair close to her bed and settled in like he had nowhere more important to be, Clara allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Clara spent 3 days in the hospital. 3 days of rest, proper meals, IV fluids, and medical attention she hadn't realized she desperately needed. The doctors ran tests and found she was severely anemic, vitamin deficient, and suffering from chronic stress that had manifested in physical symptoms. Nothing life-threatening, the cheerful nurse told her, but definitely serious enough that she needed to take better care of herself going forward. Nathaniel visited every day. Sometimes he worked from her room, his laptop open and phone constantly buzzing with calls he'd step outside to take. Other times he just sat and talked with her, asking questions about her life that nobody had bothered to ask in years. What did she like to read? What kind of music made her happy? If she could go anywhere in the world, where would it be? Clara found herself opening up to him in ways that surprised her. Maybe it was because he'd already seen her at her lowest, so there was no point in pretending. Or maybe it was because when he listened, he really listened. Not just waiting for his turn to talk, but actually hearing what she said and remembering the details. On the second day, his lawyer arrived. Patricia Kim was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit. She sat beside Clara's bed with a legal pad and asked gentle but thorough questions about James. When did the abuse start? How often did it happen? Did Clara have documentation or witnesses? Had she ever filed police reports? Clara answered as best she could, though many of her memories were fragmented. Trauma had a way of making time fuzzy, but Patricia took notes without judgment, occasionally pausing to let Clara collect herself when the memories became too overwhelming. "We have enough to file for a restraining order," Patricia said when they finished. "And based on what you've told me, I believe we can also pursue criminal charges for assault and stalking. The marks on your face are well documented now, thanks to the hospital photos. That's solid evidence." Clara felt her chest tighten. What if it makes him angrier? What if he comes after me? "That's why we're also arranging for personal security," Nathaniel said from his spot by the window. He'd been quiet during the interview, letting Patricia do her job, but now he stepped closer. "I've hired a protection service. Someone will be with you whenever you need to go out until James is dealt with." "I can't afford that," Clara protested. "I can barely afford my rent. Personal security is for rich people and celebrities." "I'm paying for it," Nathaniel said simply. "And before you argue, this isn't up for debate. Your safety is non-negotiable." Clara wanted to fight him on it, wanted to maintain some shred of independence and dignity. But she was so tired of fighting, so tired of doing everything alone, so tired of being scared every time she walked to her car or heard footsteps behind her on the street. "Thank you," she whispered instead. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you for all of this." Nathaniel's expression softened. "You don't have to repay kindness, Clara. That's not how it works." Patricia left shortly after, with a promise to have the restraining order filed within 24 hours. True to her word, by the next afternoon, James had been served with legal papers that prohibited him from coming within 500 feet of Clara. It wouldn't stop him if he was truly determined. Clara knew that. But it was something, a line drawn in the sand, a statement that said she mattered enough for the law to protect her. On the morning of her 3rd day, Dr. Martinez came in with discharge papers and a stern lecture about self-care. "You need to eat regular meals, take the vitamins I'm prescribing, and get proper sleep. No more working 2 jobs until you collapse. Your body is not invincible, Clara. You need to treat it better." Clara nodded, feeling properly chastised. "I will," I promise. Good. Now, Mr. Reeves has mentioned that you'll be staying somewhere other than your previous address for the time being. I think that's wise given the circumstances. Just make sure wherever you go, you have support and resources. After the doctor left, Clara turned to Nathaniel, who was packing up his laptop. What did she mean about staying somewhere else? I have an apartment. I paid rent through the end of the month. Nathaniel looked uncomfortable, which was unusual for him. About that, your apartment building isn't secure. No doorman, no cameras, locks that could be picked by a determined teenager. I don't think it's safe for you to go back there, at least not until James is formally charged and dealt with. Clara's stomach sank. So where am I supposed to go? I don't have family, I don't have friends with spare rooms, and I definitely can't afford a hotel. You can stay at the estate, Nathaniel said quickly. We have a guest house that's completely separate from the main building. Private entrance, full kitchen, bedroom, and bathroom. It's empty right now. You'd have privacy and security. Clara stared at him. You want me to live on your property? Nathaniel, that's completely inappropriate. People will talk. The other staff members will think I'm getting special treatment or that there's something. So, she trailed off, her face burning. The idea of living in Nathaniel Reeves's guest house, of being that close to him every day, made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Over the past 3 days, she'd come to see him as more than just her employer. He was kind, intelligent, funny in a dry way that caught her off guard. And when he looked at her with those grey eyes, she felt seen in a way she'd never experienced before. But that was dangerous territory. She was his employee. She was damaged goods, still legally married to an abuser, with nothing to offer someone like Nathaniel except problems and baggage. Getting involved with him, even just living on his property, would be a terrible idea. People will talk regardless of what you do, Nathaniel said pragmatically. That's what people do, but your safety matters more than gossip. And Clara, I'm not suggesting this because I expect anything from you. I'm suggesting it because it's practical. The estate has security, gates, cameras, guards who patrol at night. If James somehow violates the restraining order, he won't be able to get anywhere near you. He had a point. Clara's apartment building had none of those things. She'd chosen it because it was cheap and close to the bus line, not because it was safe. If James decided to ignore the legal papers, nothing would stop him from breaking down her door. What about my job? She asked. Am I still employed at the estate, or did I lose my position when I fainted and disrupted everything? You're still employed, Nathaniel said, but I'd like to offer you a different position if you're interested, not as a maid, but as my personal assistant. The pay is significantly better, the hours are more reasonable, and you'd be working directly with me rather than with the general household staff. Clara's mouth fell open. Personal assistant? Nathaniel, I don't have any office skills. I don't know how to use half the software programs you probably need. I barely graduated high school because I was working full-time to help support my mom. I'm not qualified to be anyone's assistant, especially not a CEO's. You're more qualified than you think, Nathaniel countered. You're organized, detail-oriented, trustworthy, and you work harder than anyone I've ever met. The technical skills can be taught, the character traits can't. Besides, my current assistant Janet has been begging me to hire someone to help with scheduling and correspondence. She's drowning in work and could use support. It was an incredibly generous offer. Personal assistants to billionaire CEOs probably made more in a year than Clara had made in the past 5 combined. It would mean financial security, the ability to pay off her mother's medical bills, maybe even save money for the first time in her adult life. But it also meant being close to Nathaniel every day. Seeing him, working with him, developing feelings that she had no business developing for a man so far out of her league, it was almost laughable. Can I think about it? Clara asked carefully. Of course. Take all the time you need. The offer stands regardless of what you decide about staying in the guest house. Those are 2 separate things. A nurse came in then with a wheelchair, hospital policy for discharge even though Clara felt strong enough to walk. Nathaniel gathered her few belongings, which amounted to the clothes she'd been wearing when she collapsed, and a small bag of toiletries someone had brought from her apartment. The car ride back to the Sterling estate was quiet. Clara watched the city pass by outside the window, trying to process everything that had happened in the past 72 hours. Her entire life had changed. She had legal protection from James, medical care she desperately needed, a job offer that could transform her financial situation, and a safe place to stay. All because a billionaire CEO had decided she was worth helping. It still didn't feel real. Any moment she expected to wake up in her cramped apartment, late for work, with James pounding on her door demanding she come back to him. This couldn't actually be her life now. People like her didn't get rescued by handsome billionaires. That only happened in romance novels and movies. The estate looked different when they pulled through the gates. Clara had worked here for 8 months, but always through the service entrance, arriving before dawn and leaving after dark. She'd never really looked at it the way a guest would. The manicured gardens, the fountain in the center of the circular driveway, the elegant architecture that managed to be both imposing and welcoming. Instead of going to the main house, they drove around back to a smaller building Clara had seen from windows but never approached. The guest house was charming, built in the same style as the main estate but on a more human scale. Ivy climbed one wall and flower boxes sat beneath the windows. Nathaniel helped her out of the car and unlocked the front door. Inside was exactly as he'd described, a cozy living room with a fireplace and comfortable furniture, a kitchen with modern appliances and granite countertops, a bedroom with a queen-sized bed and soft linens, a bathroom with a deep tub that made Clara's muscles ache just looking at it. "The fridge is stocked," Nathaniel said, showing her around. "Fresh fruits, vegetables, proteins. I had my chef prepare some meals that just need to be reheated. There's a panic button by the bed and another by the front door. If you press it, security will be here in under a minute." Clara walked through the space in a daze. This guest house was nicer than anywhere she'd ever lived. The monthly rent on her apartment would probably cover utilities here for a week. "I don't know what to say," she finally managed. "Say you'll stay. Say you'll let yourself be safe and taken care of for once in your life." Clara turned to face him. Nathaniel stood in the doorway between the living room and kitchen, hands in his pockets, looking uncertain in a way she'd never seen before. He'd been so confident at the hospital, making decisions and giving orders, but now he looked almost vulnerable, like he genuinely cared about her answer and was afraid she'd say no. "Why are you doing all this?" Clara asked. "And please don't say it's just because of your mother. I know that's part of it, but there's more. I can feel it. You barely know me, Nathaniel. For all you know, I could be lying about everything. I could be taking advantage of your kindness." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft but steady. "Do you remember what you said when you woke up in the hospital, when you didn't know where you were or what had happened?" Clara shook her head. "You said, 'Please don't let him find me.' You were terrified, disoriented, vulnerable. And in that moment, I saw someone who'd been fighting alone for so long that asking for help had become impossible. Someone who expected to be hurt, to be abandoned, to be disappointed." He took a step closer. "I'm doing this because when I look at you, I don't see someone who needs to be saved. I see someone who's been saving herself with no support or resources, and who deserves to know what it feels like to have someone in her corner." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. "You make me sound so much braver than I actually am. You survived an abusive marriage. You escaped. You've been working 2 jobs and sleeping 3 hours a night just to keep your head above water. You're still standing even though life has given you every reason to give up. If that's not brave, I don't know what is." Clara wiped at her eyes, embarrassed by the tears but unable to stop them. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I'll stay, and I'll take the job as your assistant. I'll probably be terrible at it, but I'll try my best." Nathaniel's face broke into a genuine smile, the kind that reached his eyes and transformed his whole expression. "You won't be terrible. You'll be amazing. And Clara, thank you for trusting me." He left shortly after, promising to send someone by with more of her belongings from her apartment and giving her his personal cell phone number in case she needed anything during the night. Clara stood in the middle of the guest house after he left, still not quite believing this was real. She explored more thoroughly once she was alone. The closet had hangers and a few basic pieces of clothing in her size, tags still attached. The bathroom had high-end toiletries and soft towels. The kitchen had not just food but also coffee, tea, and a selection of snacks. Someone, probably Nathaniel, had thought of everything. That night, Clara took a long bath in the deep tub, letting hot water soak away weeks of tension and fear. She ate a proper meal, reheated pasta that was better than anything she could have made herself. And then she crawled into the comfortable bed with its soft sheets and down pillows and slept for 12 hours straight. She woke to sunlight streaming through windows she'd forgotten to cover, and for the first time in months, she felt rested. Her body didn't ache, her head didn't pound. The constant anxiety that usually greeted her upon waking was quieter, pushed back by the knowledge that she was safe here. There was a knock at the door around 9. Clara threw on one of the provided robes and answered to find Sophie standing there with a covered tray and a wide smile. "Morning delivery," Sophie said cheerfully. "Mr. Reeves said you might like breakfast. There's fresh fruit, yogurt, granola, and the chef made these amazing blueberry muffins." Clara took the tray, touched by the gesture. "Thank you. Do you want to come in for a minute?" Sophie glanced behind her toward the main house, then stepped inside. "I can't stay long. Mrs. Whitmore has us on a tight schedule today." But Clara, oh my God, everyone is talking about what happened. Is it true? Did Mr. Reeves really carry you to the hospital and stay with you for 3 days? Clara set the tray down on the kitchen counter. He visited. He didn't stay the entire time, but he visited every day. And now you're living in the guest house, and rumor has it you're going to be his new personal assistant. Sophie's eyes were bright with curiosity and excitement. "This is like something out of a romance novel." "It's not like that," Clara said quickly. "He's just being kind. He's helping me through a difficult situation." "Uh-huh." Sophie didn't look convinced. "Clara, I've worked at this estate for 5 years. I've seen Mr. Reeves interact with hundreds of people. Staff, business associates, dates he's brought to various events. And I have never, not once, seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Clara's heart did a strange flip in her chest. "How does he look at me? Like you're the most important person in the room. Like nothing else matters when you're talking. Like he'd do absolutely anything to keep you safe." Sophie grinned. "Trust me, that man is interested, and from the way you blush every time his name comes up, I'd say the feeling might be mutual." "Even if that were true, which it's not," Clara said firmly, "it would be completely inappropriate. He's my employer, I'm his staff, and I'm still technically married to James, even though I left him months ago." "Details," Sophie waved her hand dismissively. "Details that can be worked out if two people actually care about each other. But hey, I'm not trying to push anything. I just think you should know that you deserve good things, Clara. You deserve someone who treats you like you matter. And if that someone happens to be a gorgeous billionaire CEO who can't take his eyes off you, well, there are worse problems to have." After Sophie left, Clara ate breakfast and thought about what her friend had said. Was Nathaniel interested in her as more than just someone to help? The idea seemed impossible. But then again, a week ago she would have said it was impossible for a billionaire to care whether she lived or died. And yet here she was, living in his guest house and about to start a new job. If you've ever been given a second chance when you thought your story was over, share it in the comments. Because sometimes the universe surprises us in the most beautiful ways. The next few weeks passed in a blur of adjustment and change. Clara started her new position as Nathaniel's assistant, working alongside Janet, an efficient woman in her 50s who took Clara under her wing immediately. The learning curve was steep, but Janet was patient, teaching Clara how to manage Nathaniel's complex schedule, handle correspondence, and navigate the various software systems the company used. Nathaniel was patient too, never making Clara feel stupid when she asked questions or made mistakes. He explained things clearly, appreciated her efforts, and genuinely seemed pleased to have her there. They fell into an easy rhythm, and Clara found she actually enjoyed the work. It was challenging but rewarding, and it felt good to use her brain in new ways. The personal security turned out to be less intrusive than Clara feared. Marcus, her assigned guard, was a former police officer in his 40s who had a kind face and a calm demeanor. He drove her places when needed, walked with her when she wanted to explore the estate grounds, and generally made her feel safe without making her feel watched. Patricia Kim called regularly with updates on the legal proceedings. James had violated the restraining order twice already, showing up at Clara's old apartment building and at the laundromat where she'd worked nights. Both times he'd been arrested, and the violations had strengthened their case for more serious charges. The divorce proceedings had also begun, with Patricia confident they could push it through quickly, given the documented abuse. Life was getting better. Clara could feel herself healing, both physically and emotionally. The nightmares about James became less frequent. The constant fear that had followed her everywhere started to ease. She laughed more, smiled genuinely instead of forcing it, started to remember what it felt like to simply exist without constantly looking over her shoulder. And then there was Nathaniel. Clara tried not to think too much about her growing feelings for him, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. They spent hours together every day, and he was so different from what she'd expected. Yes, he was brilliant and driven and successful, but he was also kind, funny, surprisingly humble about his achievements. He asked about her day like he genuinely cared, remembered small details she mentioned in passing, made her coffee exactly how she liked it without being asked. One evening, about a month after she'd moved into the guest house, Nathaniel knocked on her door with takeout containers and a tentative smile. "I know you probably have plans," he said, "but my meeting got cancelled and I have way too much Thai food for one person. Would you want to join me for dinner?" Clara knew she should say no, knew that having dinner alone with him would blur lines that were already getting fuzzy, but she found herself saying yes anyway, stepping aside to let him in. They sat on her couch eating pad thai and spring rolls, talking about everything and nothing. Nathaniel told her about the stress of the upcoming board meeting. Clara shared a funny story about a mistake she'd made with his calendar that had resulted in him showing up to a meeting 24 hours early. They laughed together, and it felt easy and natural and right. "Can I ask you something personal?" Nathaniel said after a while. "You've seen me at my absolute lowest. I think you've earned the right to ask personal questions. What made you finally leave James? What was the moment you decided enough was enough?" Clara was quiet, thinking back to that horrible night 6 months ago. "He almost killed me," she said softly. "We were fighting about money, which we always fought about. I'd used grocery money to buy flowers for my mother's grave. Nothing expensive, just a small bouquet. But James was furious. He said I was wasting money, disrespecting him, putting her memory above his needs." She took a shaky breath. Nathaniel reached over and took her hand, offering silent support. He pushed me down the stairs. I fell 12 steps and hit my head on the landing. When I woke up, he was standing over me, crying and apologizing and saying he didn't mean it, that he loved me, that he'd change, all the things he always said. Clara looked at Nathaniel directly, but I was bleeding from a cut on my head, and I couldn't feel my left arm properly, and I remember thinking, if I stay, he's going to kill me. Maybe not today, maybe not next month, but eventually. So, when he went to get ice for my head, I grabbed my purse and I ran. I've been running ever since. "You're not running anymore," Nathaniel said firmly. "You're building a new life. There's a difference. Thanks to you." "No, thanks to your own strength and courage. I just provided resources. You did the hard part." They looked at each other for a long moment, and Clara felt something shift between them. The air seemed charged with possibility, with words unspoken and feelings acknowledged without being named. Nathaniel's thumb brushed across her knuckles, and Clara's breath caught. "Clara," he said softly, "I need to tell you something, and I want you to know there's absolutely no pressure attached. Your job is secure regardless. Your housing is secure regardless. None of that changes based on how you respond. Okay?" Her heart was pounding. "Okay, I care about you. More than I should, probably. More than is strictly professional or appropriate given our working relationship. But I can't help it. You're extraordinary. And over the past month, watching you heal and grow stronger and come back to yourself, I've found myself falling for you." He paused. "I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know, because hiding it was starting to feel dishonest." Clara's eyes filled with tears. Good tears this time. Happy tears. "I care about you too," she whispered. "I've been trying not to because it seemed impossible. You're you, and I'm just me. But when I'm with you, I feel safe. I feel seen. I feel like maybe I deserve good things after all." "You deserve everything good," Nathaniel said intensely. "Every happiness, every kindness, every beautiful thing the world has to offer. And I know the timing isn't perfect. I know you're still healing. But when you're ready, if you ever want to explore this thing between us, I'm here, however long it takes." Clara thought about it. Thought about all the reasons she should wait, should be cautious, should protect her heart. But she'd been protecting her heart for so long, and where had it gotten her? She'd been so busy surviving that she'd forgotten how to live. "What if we took it slow?" she said carefully. "Really slow. Like, slower than normal people slow. Because I want to explore this, Nathaniel. I want to see where it might go. But I'm also terrified of messing it up or bringing all my damage into something that could be beautiful." Nathaniel's smile was so warm it made her chest ache. "Slow is perfect. We can go at whatever pace you need. There's no rush. I'm not going anywhere." That night marked the beginning of something new. They started going on actual dates, though Nathaniel was careful to keep things gentle and pressure-free. Dinners at quiet restaurants, walks through the estate gardens, movie nights in her guest house, with appropriate distance maintained between them on the couch. He never pushed for more than she was ready to give, content to build something real instead of rushing toward physical intimacy. Clara's divorce from James was finalized 2 months later. Patricia called with the news, her voice triumphant. "It's done. You're officially free." "And Clara?" "James accepted a plea deal on the assault and stalking charges. He's going to serve 18 months in county jail, followed by 3 years probation. Part of the probation terms include staying away from you permanently. If he violates it, he goes back to prison." Clara felt like she could finally breathe fully for the first time in years. Free. She was actually free. No longer legally bound to a man who tried to destroy her. No longer looking over her shoulder constantly. Just free to build whatever life she wanted. She called Nathaniel immediately. He was in a meeting but stepped out to take her call. "He's going to jail," she said, her voice breaking with relief. "It's really over. I'm really free." "I'm so glad," Nathaniel said warmly. "You deserve this, Clara. You deserve peace and safety and freedom. How do you want to celebrate? Can you come over tonight? I don't want anything fancy. I just want to be with you." "I'll be there. I'll be there." That evening, Nathaniel arrived with champagne and Chinese takeout. They ate and laughed and talked about the future in a way Clara had never felt safe doing before. What she might want to study if she decided to go back to school. Where she might like to travel now that she could think beyond just surviving day to day. What dreams she'd put on hold that might be worth resurrecting. After dinner, they sat together on the couch, closer than usual. Nathaniel had his arm around her shoulders, and Clara felt perfectly safe and perfectly happy. This man had seen her broken and hadn't run away, had offered help without expecting anything in return, had been patient while she healed and figured out who she was outside of fear and trauma. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for seeing me when I was invisible, for standing up for me, for giving me a chance to build something better." "Always," Nathaniel said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You've taught me just as much, Clara. You've reminded me why success matters. Not the money or the recognition, but the ability to make a real difference in someone's life. You've made me a better person." Clara turned to look at him, and the expression on his face took her breath away. Love. That was love in his eyes. Not pity, not obligation, just pure, genuine love for her exactly as she was. "I love you," she said, the words spilling out before she could second-guess them. "I know it's fast, and I know I'm probably supposed to wait longer, but I love you. You changed my life in the best possible way." Nathaniel's face broke into the most beautiful smile. "I love you too. I have for weeks. I was just waiting for the right moment to say it." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet and full of promise, and Clara kissed him back, letting herself fall into the moment without fear or reservation. This was real. This was right. This was the beginning of the life she'd always deserved, but never believed she could have. 6 months after Clara moved into the guest house, her life had transformed in ways she still sometimes couldn't believe. She woke up every morning in a place where she felt safe. She went to work doing something she was good at and genuinely enjoyed. She had money in her savings account for the first time in her adult life, and she was in love with a man who treated her like she hung the moon. But the best part wasn't the material changes, as wonderful as those were. The best part was that Clara had found herself again, the person she'd been before James, before the abuse and fear and constant survival mode. She laughed easily now, made jokes, had opinions she wasn't afraid to voice, wore colors other than black and gray, let her hair down literally and figuratively. Nathaniel noticed all of it. He'd comment on a new dress she wore or tell her how beautiful she looked when she smiled. He encouraged her to pursue her interests, even buying her art supplies when she mentioned she used to love painting. He celebrated her successes at work and supported her through the occasional setbacks that came with learning new skills. Their relationship had deepened naturally over the months. They'd progressed from chaste kisses to more, always at Clara's pace, always with her comfort as the priority. Nathaniel never pushed, never demanded, never made her feel like she owed him anything physical because of everything he'd done for her. He just loved her, patiently and completely, waiting for her to be ready for each new step. The staff at the estate had warmed to Clara over time. Once they realized she wasn't getting special treatment because of inappropriate reasons, but because she genuinely needed help and their employer was a decent human being, they'd accepted her as one of them. Sophie remained her closest friend, but Clara had developed friendships with several other staff members too. She belonged here now, not as invisible help but as a valued member of the household. Clara had also started attending a weekly support group for domestic violence survivors. The first meeting had been terrifying. Walking into a room full of strangers and admitting she'd been abused felt like ripping open old wounds. But the other women there understood in a way nobody else could. They'd lived through similar experiences. They knew what it was like to love someone who hurt you, to leave and still feel guilty, to heal slowly, with setbacks and triumphs in equal measure. There was Rebecca, a mother of 3 who'd left her husband after he broke her arm. Maria, who'd been married to a successful lawyer who terrorized her behind closed doors. Keisha, whose boyfriend had isolated her from family and friends before escalating to physical violence. Each woman had her own story, her own scars, her own journey toward healing. Clara found strength in their stories, found hope in seeing women who were years ahead in their recovery, living full lives, dating again, or choosing to be happily single. Found purpose in sharing her own experience when new members joined, seeing their eyes light up with recognition and relief that they weren't alone. Mrs. Whitmore had been the hardest to win over. The head housekeeper had maintained her stiff professionalism for months, clearly disapproving of Clara's changed circumstances. But even she had eventually thawed, especially after Clara helped reorganize the household scheduling system to be more efficient and fair. Turned out Clara had a talent for logistics that made everyone's life easier. One evening in early spring, Nathaniel asked Clara to have dinner with him in the main house. Not unusual in itself, they ate together often, but something about the way he asked, with a nervous energy she rarely saw from him, made Clara's heart race. She dressed carefully in a blue dress he'd once said he loved on her, did her hair and makeup with more care than usual, and walked across the estate grounds as the sun was setting. The main house looked beautiful in the golden light, and Clara felt a surge of affection for this place that had become her sanctuary. Nathaniel met her at the door, looking devastating in dark slacks and a white button-down shirt. His hair was slightly tousled, like he'd been running his hands through it nervously. "You look incredible," he said, his eyes warm with appreciation and something deeper. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Clara teased, rising on her toes to kiss him. He wrapped his arms around her waist, holding her close for a moment longer than usual, and Clara felt his heart beating fast against her chest. He led her to the formal dining room, which had been transformed, candles everywhere, casting soft light that made the whole space glow. Fresh flowers in elegant arrangements, their scent filling the air. The table set for 2 with fine china and crystal glasses that caught the candlelight. Soft music playing from hidden speakers, something classical and romantic. "Nathaniel, what is all this?" Clara asked, taking in the romantic scene with growing excitement and nervousness. I wanted to do something special. We've been together for 6 months, and Clara, they've been the best 6 months of my life. You've changed everything for me, made me remember what's important, made me want to be better, made me realize what I'd been missing all these years, building an empire but forgetting to build a life. They sat down to a meal prepared by the estate's chef. Multiple courses, each more delicious than the last. Butternut squash soup, garnished with crispy sage, fresh salad with honey vinaigrette, pan-seared salmon with asparagus, and roasted potatoes. Each dish was presented beautifully, like something from a 5-star restaurant. They talked and laughed throughout the meal, comfortable in the way people who truly know each other can be. Clara told him about a funny incident at work, where she'd accidentally scheduled him for 3 meetings at the same time. Nathaniel shared a story about a difficult board member who'd finally come around to supporting a new initiative he was passionate about. But Clara noticed Nathaniel seemed distracted, like he was waiting for something. His hand would drift to his pocket periodically. He'd start to say something, then stop. His knee bounced under the table, a nervous habit she'd never seen from him before. After dessert, a rich chocolate torte that melted on her tongue, he took her hand across the table. "Let's go outside. There's something I want to show you." The estate gardens were magical at night. Path lighting created pools of warm glow along the walkways. The scent of spring flowers hung heavy in the air, mixed with fresh-cut grass. In the distance, the city lights twinkled like earthbound stars. The temperature was perfect, warm enough to be comfortable but cool enough to be refreshing. Nathaniel led Clara to a gazebo she'd always loved, a beautiful white structure with climbing roses just beginning to bloom and a view of both the gardens and the city beyond. She'd spent many afternoons there reading or just thinking, finding peace in the quiet beauty of the space. But tonight it looked different. Inside the gazebo, more candles had been arranged, their flames protected from the gentle breeze by glass hurricanes. Rose petals were scattered across the floor, and in the center, on a small table draped with white linen, sat a velvet box. Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Nathaniel." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. His hands were shaking slightly, and seeing this confident, powerful man, nervous, made Clara's heart melt. "Clara, I know we haven't been together very long. By conventional standards, 6 months is nothing. People would probably say we're rushing, that we should wait longer. I know you're still healing from everything James put you through. I know the divorce isn't even final yet. I know there are 1,000 logical reasons to wait." He paused, taking a deep breath. "But I also know that I love you more than I've ever loved anyone or anything. I know that every day with you is better than any day without you. I know that when I think about my future, you're in every vision, every plan, every dream. I know that you make me want to be the kind of man who deserves you. And I know that life is short and uncertain, and when you find something real, something worth holding on to, you don't let it slip away because you're worried about timelines or what other people think." He released one of her hands to pick up the velvet box. When he opened it, Clara saw the most beautiful ring she'd ever seen. A simple but elegant diamond that caught the candlelight and threw rainbows across the gazebo walls. Not ostentatious or over the top, just perfect. Exactly what she would have chosen for herself if she'd dared to dream about such things. "I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow," Nathaniel continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not asking you to rush into anything before you're ready. Your healing journey is yours, and I'll wait as long as you need. But I am asking if you'll consider spending your life with me. If you'll wear this ring as a promise that someday, when the time is right for both of us, when you've healed as much as you need to heal, when the divorce is final and you're ready for a new beginning, you'll marry me. Clara Bennett, will you be my fiancé? Will you let me be the man who gets to love you for the rest of our lives?" Clara felt tears streaming down her face. Happy tears, the kind she'd never thought she'd cry again. The kind that came from joy so pure it couldn't be contained. 6 months ago, she'd been a woman who fainted from exhaustion and malnutrition, who whispered her pain to a room full of strangers, who thought happiness was something that happened to other people. Now she was standing in a candlelit gazebo wearing a beautiful dress being asked to marry a man who saw her worth when she couldn't see it herself. "That's the most thoughtful, ridiculous, wonderful proposal I've ever heard," she said, laughing through her tears. "Engaged to be engaged? Who even does that?" "Apparently I do when I'm nervous and trying to respect your healing process while also not being able to contain my feelings anymore," Nathaniel admitted with a sheepish smile that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "That's a yes," Clara said firmly, her voice ringing clear and certain in the spring night. "Yes, I'll wear your ring. Yes, I want to spend my life with you. Yes to all of it, Nathaniel. I love you so much it scares me sometimes, because I never knew love could be like this, patient and kind and respectful. I never knew I could feel safe and loved and seen all at the same time. You gave me that. You gave me back myself." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it was always meant to be there. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world, like he couldn't quite believe his luck, like he wanted to memorize this moment. Clara kissed him back, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into it, tasting salt from both their tears. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard and grinning like fools, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. "I was so nervous you'd say it was too soon, that you'd need more time, that I'd pushed too hard." "It probably is too soon by normal standards," Clara admitted, running her fingers through his hair the way she knew he loved. "But nothing about us has been normal from the beginning. And I've learned that sometimes you have to grab happiness when it's offered, instead of waiting for the perfect moment that might never come. This is my perfect moment, Nathaniel. Right here, right now, with you. I don't need more time to know that I want this, that I want you, that I want to build a life together." They stayed in the gazebo for hours after that, sitting close on the cushioned bench, talking about the future in a way Clara had never felt safe doing before. Where they wanted to travel, with Nathaniel promising to show her the world she'd only seen in books and movies. Whether they wanted children, both agreeing they did, though Clara wanted to wait until she felt more healed. What kind of wedding they might have someday, Clara admitting she'd always dreamed of something simple and meaningful rather than elaborate. "I want Sophie there," Clara said, "and the women from my support group, and I want the ceremony to focus on partnership and equality, not on possession or one person being given away to another. I want it to celebrate us choosing each other freely." "We can have whatever kind of wedding you want," Nathaniel assured her. 5 people or 500, formal or casual, traditional or completely unique. As long as I get to call you my wife at the end of it, I'm happy." The word wife sent a shiver of pleasure and disbelief through Clara. She was going to be someone's wife again, but this time it would mean something completely different. Partnership instead of ownership, choice instead of obligation, love instead of control. They talked about their childhood dreams, the ones they'd set aside or forgotten. Clara confessed she'd always wanted to learn to dance properly, not just swaying at weddings, but really dance. Nathaniel immediately promised to hire a dance instructor. Nathaniel admitted he'd always wanted to learn to play piano, but had been too busy building his company. Clara suggested he start now, reminding him it was never too late to pursue passions. "I want us to keep surprising each other," Clara said. "Keep growing and learning and becoming more of ourselves. I don't want to be one of those couples who gets comfortable and stops trying." "Agreed," Nathaniel said. "Though I have to say, comfortable doesn't sound so bad when I've spent most of my adult life uncomfortable in various ways. Uncomfortable with fake friends who only wanted my money. Uncomfortable at society events where everyone was performing. Uncomfortable in relationships that looked good on paper but felt empty. You're the first person I've ever been genuinely comfortable with. The first person I can just be myself around without any performance or pretense." It was nearly midnight when they finally made their way back toward the main house, hands linked, rings glinting in the moonlight. Clara felt like she was floating. Tomorrow would bring challenges, she knew that. Healing wasn't linear, and she'd still have hard days. But tonight was perfect, and she was learning to be present in perfect moments instead of always worrying about what might go wrong. The next morning, Clara showed up to work wearing her ring. Janet took one look at it and squealed loud enough to make Clara jump and spill coffee on her desk. Within an hour, the entire household staff knew Sophie hugged Clara so hard she could barely breathe, crying happy tears and demanding to know every detail. Even Mrs. Whitmore offered stiff congratulations that seemed genuine, her eyes softening in a way Clara had never seen before. "You've done well for yourself," the older woman said quietly when they had a moment alone. "Not because of the ring or the wealth, though those are nice, but because you found someone who treats you the way you deserve. That's worth more than all the diamonds in the world." But not everyone was happy about the news. That afternoon, Clara was working in Nathaniel's home office, organizing files and responding to emails, when his younger sister Victoria stormed in unannounced. Clara had met Victoria a handful of times at family dinners and various events. She was beautiful in that effortless way wealthy people often were, fashionable with an edge, and she'd made it clear from the beginning that she thought her brother could do better than a former maid. "Is it true?" Victoria demanded, ignoring Clara entirely and addressing Nathaniel, who was on a video conference call. "Are you actually engaged to her?" Nathaniel held up one finger, asking her to wait, and finished his call with impressive professionalism, considering the rudeness his sister was displaying. When he finally disconnected, his expression was hard. "Good afternoon to you too, Victoria. And yes, Clara and I are engaged. I'd appreciate it if you'd be respectful about it." "Respectful?" Victoria's laugh was sharp enough to cut. "Nathaniel, she's a maid. She was literally scrubbing your toilets 6 months ago. Now she's wearing what looks like a $50,000 ring and living in your guest house. Can you not see how this looks to everyone? What people are saying?" Clara felt her face burn with embarrassment and old shame. The voice in her head that sounded suspiciously like James whispered that Victoria was right, that she was reaching above her station, that she didn't belong in Nathaniel's world, and never would. Her hand moved instinctively to cover the ring, wanting to hide it, wanting to make herself smaller and less visible. But then Nathaniel stood up, and his voice was cold in a way Clara had only heard once before, the day he'd fired Richard for grabbing her. Clara was never just a maid. She was someone trying to survive impossible circumstances. She was working 2 jobs and sleeping 3 hours a night to pay off her dead mother's medical bills while escaping an abusive husband. She works harder than anyone I've ever met. She's kind, intelligent, brave, compassionate, and she makes me happier than I've ever been. If you can't see her worth, Victoria, that's a failure of your perception, not her character." Victoria's eyes widened. She clearly wasn't used to her brother speaking to her like that, his voice sharp with barely contained anger. "But what will people say? What will the press write? Former Maidland's billionaire CEO. They'll make it sound sordid and calculating. They'll say she's a gold digger, that she manipulated you, that this is some kind of scandal. Let them," Nathaniel said flatly, his jaw tight. "I don't give a damn what gossip columnists or society people think. Their opinions mean nothing to me. I care about Clara. I care about building a life with someone who sees me as a person, not a bank account. And if you can't accept her as part of this family, Victoria, then you're welcome to skip family dinners until you can learn some basic decency and manners." The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. Clara wanted to disappear, wanted to be anywhere but stuck in the middle of this family conflict. She'd known dating Nathaniel would come with complications, but facing his sister's open hostility was harder than she'd expected. Finally, Victoria turned to Clara directly for the first time since storming in. Her expression was still cold, but there was something else there too. Concern, maybe, or fear. "You really love him? This isn't about his money or his connections or what he can give you." Clara met her eyes steadily, refusing to look away even though every instinct screamed at her to stay small and quiet. "I loved him when I thought he'd fired me, and I'd never see him again. I loved him when he visited me in the hospital, and I had nothing to offer him but problems and baggage. I loved him before I knew he was planning to propose. Yes, I really love him, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving to everyone, including you, that I'm worthy of him. Not because of what I can become or how I can change, but because of who I already am." Something in Victoria's expression shifted slightly, the hard edges softening just a fraction. "He's my brother, my only sibling. I just want to make sure he's not being taken advantage of. That someone isn't using his kindness and his guilt about his childhood to manipulate him. I understand that, Clara said, her voice gentler now. I'd probably feel the same way in your position. Family is supposed to protect each other. But Nathaniel saved my life, Victoria. He gave me a chance when I had nothing and nowhere to go. The last thing I would ever do is hurt him. He's the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I know how lucky I am. Victoria nodded slowly, processing Clara's words. She looked at her brother, who was still standing with his arms crossed, clearly prepared to defend Clara against any further attacks. Fine, she said finally. I'll try. I'll try to see what you apparently see in her. But Nathaniel, if she breaks your heart, if this turns out to be a mistake, I'm allowed to say I told you so. Fair enough, Nathaniel said, his voice warming slightly though his posture remained protective. Though I'm not worried. And Victoria, Clara isn't going to break my heart, but your behavior right now is coming pretty close to damaging our relationship. I need you to do better, be better. She's going to be my wife. That means she's family. Treat her accordingly. After Victoria left, looking chastened and thoughtful, Clara sank into a chair. Her hands were shaking, and she felt drained like she'd run a marathon. That was worse than I imagined. She'll come around, Nathaniel assured her, kneeling beside her chair and taking her trembling hands. My sister is protective, and yes, sometimes she's a snob, but she's not cruel. Once she gets to know you properly, once she sees how good we are together, she'll love you like I do. What if people really do talk, though? Clara asked, voicing the fear that had been building. What if being with me damages your reputation or your business? What if— Then let it burn, Nathaniel interrupted firmly. Clara, look at me. Really, look at me. I don't care what anyone thinks except you. The people whose opinions actually matter, the ones who know both of us and understand what we've built together, they see how good we are for each other. Everyone else can think whatever they want. It doesn't change how I feel. It doesn't change my commitment to you. It doesn't change anything that matters. Clara searched his face and found only sincerity and fierce determination. This man who could have anyone, who moved in circles where she'd once been invisible, had chosen her, not despite her past, but understanding it fully and loving her anyway. Okay, she whispered. Okay, we'll face it together. Always, he promised, pulling her into his arms and holding her tight. Whatever comes, we face it together. That's what partners do. Over the next few months, Clara discovered he was right about almost everything. Yes, there were articles when their engagement became public knowledge, photos of them together at charity events and restaurants, sometimes candid shots taken by paparazzi that felt invasive and uncomfortable, headlines that ranged from breathless and romantic to skeptical and unkind. Billionaire CEO falls for former maid, one tabloid proclaimed. Modern-day Cinderella story or calculated social climbing? Questioned another. Clara learned to ignore most of it, though some days were harder than others. Days when she'd read a particularly cruel opinion piece suggesting she was a gold digger or that Nathaniel was going through some kind of midlife crisis. Days when she'd see her face on magazine covers next to articles speculating about their relationship. Days when strangers on social media felt entitled to comment on her appearance, her past, her worthiness. But there were supporters too, more than Clara had expected. People who thought their story was romantic and inspiring. Domestic violence survivors who reached out to Clara through social media, thanking her for showing that life could get better after abuse. Young women who saw Clara's transformation from invisible maid to successful personal assistant to fiancée of a billionaire as proof that worth wasn't determined by wealth or social status, but by character and perseverance. Clara started doing volunteer work with a women's shelter, using her experience to help others in similar situations. She spoke at fundraisers, her voice shaking at first but growing stronger with practice. She shared her story when asked, not for publicity, but because she understood how powerful it was to hear from someone who'd been where you were and made it to the other side. Nathaniel supported her fully in this work, often attending events with her and making generous donations to organizations supporting survivors. He listened to her process the difficult emotions that came with revisiting her trauma for the benefit of others. He held her when she came home from the shelter, feeling emotionally wrung out from hearing other women's stories that echoed her own. "You're making a real difference," he told her one night after a particularly difficult shift at the shelter. "You're giving people hope, showing them that survival is possible, that healing is possible, that love can be safe and healthy and beautiful. That matters more than any business deal I could ever close." Their engagement lasted a year, not because they needed to wait, but because they wanted to savor this phase of their relationship. The anticipation, the planning, the joy of knowing they'd chosen each other and would continue choosing each other every single day. They traveled together when Nathaniel's schedule allowed, Clara finally getting to see the world beyond the city where she'd grown up. Paris, where they wandered through the Louvre and ate pastries at sidewalk cafes. London, where they saw theatre in the West End and visited bookshops that had been open for centuries. Tokyo, where the culture shock was intense but exhilarating, and Clara fell in love with the efficiency and beauty of Japanese design. Each trip taught Clara something new about herself and about Nathaniel. She discovered she loved trying new foods and had a talent for languages. He revealed a goofy sense of humor that rarely emerged in business settings. They learned how to travel together, how to compromise when they wanted different things, how to support each other through jet lag and culture shock and the occasional disagreement. But they also did normal things that were just as important. Grocery shopping together, Clara delighting in teaching Nathaniel how to comparison shop and find deals. Movie nights at home, debating whether the book was better than the film adaptation. Walks through the estate gardens watching the seasons change. Building a life that was about more than grand gestures and expensive gifts, but about everyday moments of connection and love. Victoria did eventually come around, though it took time and effort from everyone involved. The breakthrough came when she visited Clara at the women's shelter and saw firsthand the work being done there. Saw Clara sitting with a young woman who just left an abusive relationship, offering comfort and hope from a place of genuine understanding. "I didn't realize," Victoria said afterward, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "I didn't understand what you'd been through, what you survived. I just saw the surface, the circumstances of how you and Nathaniel met. I didn't see the person beneath." "Most people don't," Clara said without rancor. "People see what they expect to see. A maid, a victim, someone reaching above her station. It takes effort to look deeper, to see the whole person instead of just the circumstances." "I'm sorry," Victoria said, and she sounded like she meant it. "For how I acted, for what I said, for not giving you a fair chance from the beginning." "Apology accepted," Clara said simply. "And Victoria, thank you for protecting your brother, for making sure he wasn't being taken advantage of. That's what good siblings do, even if the method was a bit harsh. I hope someday you'll trust that I love him as much as you do, just in a different way." By the time the wedding arrived, Victoria and Clara had developed a tentative but genuine friendship. They'd never be best friends. Their personalities and backgrounds were too different. But there was mutual respect and affection, and that was enough. The wedding was held on the estate grounds in late spring, exactly 2 years after Clara had collapsed in the foyer and Nathaniel had chosen to see her when everyone else looked away. Not overly large or ostentatious, just close friends and family gathered to celebrate. Maybe 75 people total, each one personally meaningful to the couple. Clara wore a simple white dress that made her feel beautiful without being overwhelming. Elegant lace sleeves, a flowing skirt that moved like water, a style that felt both classic and modern. Her hair was down in soft waves, and she wore minimal jewelry except for the diamond studs Nathaniel had given her for Christmas, and of course, her engagement ring. Sophie was her maid of honor, crying happy tears from the moment she helped Clara get dressed. Several other women from the shelter where Clara volunteered stood up with her too, a visible representation of the community she'd built and the lives she'd touched. Women who understood where she'd been and how far she'd come. Women who'd become her sisters in survival and healing. Nathaniel stood at the altar with his best man, an old friend from college who'd stuck by him through the early struggling days of his company. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, but Clara barely noticed the clothes. She only saw his eyes, already glistening with unshed tears, and the expression on his face that said she was everything he'd ever wanted. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. They'd written their own vows, both agreeing that generic promises didn't capture what they meant to each other. Nathaniel went first, his voice strong despite the emotion clearly visible in his expression. "Clara, you walked into my life at a moment when I'd forgotten what really mattered, when I'd built an empire but forgotten to build anything resembling a real life. You reminded me that success means nothing if you're not using it to make the world better. That wealth is worthless if you're not sharing it with people who need help. That kindness costs nothing but can change everything. You've made me a better man simply by existing in my orbit. I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of your trust, to protect you without trying to control you, to support your dreams even when they scare me, to see you, really see you, every single day, and to love you with everything I have for as long as I live." By the time he finished, Clara was crying, and half the audience was too. She took a shaky breath and began her own vows. "Nathaniel, you saved my life. I know you don't like when I say that, but it's true. Not just because you got me medical care and legal protection, though those things mattered, but because you saw me when I'd spent so long being invisible. You stood up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself. You believed I deserved better before I believed it myself. You gave me space to heal and time to find myself again. You've shown me what love is supposed to look like: patient, kind, respectful, safe. I promise to spend the rest of my life showing you what those gifts meant to me, to choose you every single day, in big ways and small ways, to be your partner in building something beautiful, to support your dreams and celebrate your victories, to see you, the real you beneath the CEO and the wealth and the reputation, and to love that person with everything I am. You're my best friend, my safe place, my home, and I can't wait to spend forever with you." When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Nathaniel kissed Clara like she was the most precious thing in the world. The audience erupted in applause and cheers, but Clara barely heard them. She was too focused on this moment, this perfect beginning to their forever. At the reception, held under an elegant tent with twinkling lights and flowers everywhere, Clara danced with her husband for the first time. They'd taken those dance lessons she'd mentioned, and while they weren't professionals, they moved together with grace and obvious love. As they swayed to a song they'd chosen together, Nathaniel whispered in her ear, "2 years ago, I walked into my house expecting a normal day. Instead, I found the love of my life collapsed on my floor. Best accidental meeting ever." Clara laughed, remembering that morning. How terrified she'd been, how certain she was about to be fired, how impossible it had seemed that anything good could come from that moment. If someone had told me that day that I'd end up married to you, I would have thought they were insane. "Good thing life is full of pleasant surprises," Nathaniel said, spinning her gently. "Though I'd like the record to show that all my future surprises will involve significantly less fainting and trauma." "Deal," Clara agreed, feeling happier than she'd ever imagined possible. They spent the evening celebrating with people they loved, eating excellent food and dancing and laughing. Clara's face hurt from smiling so much, but it was the best kind of hurt. She danced with Thomas the butler, who confessed he'd been rooting for them from the beginning. She hugged Mrs. Whitmore, who'd brought a wedding gift that turned out to be a beautifully embroidered set of dish towels with Reed monogrammed on them. She toasted with the women from her support group, all of them understanding the significance of this day in ways others couldn't. And late in the evening, when most guests had left and only close friends remained, Clara stood with Nathaniel looking out over the estate gardens, the same gardens where he'd proposed, the same grounds where she'd taken her first tentative steps toward healing. "What are you thinking about?" Nathaniel asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "How different my life is from 2 years ago. How I used to think happiness was something that happened to other people. How grateful I am that I was wrong." "We saved each other," Nathaniel said, echoing a sentiment he'd expressed before. "I know I said it already, but it bears repeating. You changed my life just as much as I changed yours." That night, as they drove away from the reception toward the honeymoon suite Nathaniel had arranged at a nearby 5-star hotel, Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a terrified woman whispering, "Please don't hit me, I'm already hurt," to a confident woman who stood in front of crowds talking about hope and healing. From someone who thought she deserved pain to someone who knew she deserved love. The road hadn't been easy. There were still hard days, still nightmares occasionally, still moments when old fears crept in, but she had tools now to handle those moments. Therapy, support systems, a partner who understood that healing wasn't linear and loved her through the setbacks as much as the victories. And she'd learned something crucial along the way, that you couldn't save someone who didn't want to be saved, but you could offer them the tools to save themselves. That kindness cost nothing but could change everything. That seeing people, really seeing them instead of looking through them, was one of the most powerful things you could do. Months turned into years. Clara and Nathaniel built a life together that was rich in all the ways that mattered. They traveled, started a foundation supporting domestic violence survivors, eventually had 2 children who grew up knowing that everyone deserves respect, regardless of their circumstances. They faced challenges like any couple, but they faced them together, as partners who'd chosen each other consciously and completely. The estate staff who'd witnessed Clara's transformation told the story for years. The maid who fainted and the billionaire who stopped to care. It became legend in domestic worker circles, proof that sometimes kindness existed in unexpected places, that sometimes people with power used it to help rather than harm. That love could bloom in the most unexpected circumstances. But for Clara and Nathaniel, it was never about some grand romantic rescue narrative. It was about seeing someone in need and choosing to help, about accepting help when it was offered, about building something real on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine love, about healing together and growing together and choosing each other every single day, in big ways and small ways. The tabloids that had once speculated breathlessly about their relationship eventually lost interest. The story became old news, but the impact rippled outward in ways they couldn't fully measure. Other wealthy people, inspired by their example, started paying closer attention to their staff, really seeing them as full human beings with their own struggles and stories. Survivors of abuse saw Clara's story and found hope that life could get better, that escape was possible, that happiness existed on the other side of fear. Young people learned valuable lessons about worth not being measured by wealth or social status, but by character and how you treated others. About power being a tool that could be used for good or ill. About the importance of seeing people who society trained you to overlook. And every year, on the anniversary of the day Clara collapsed in the foyer, she and Nathaniel had a private celebration, not for their wedding anniversary, which they celebrated with family and friends, but for the day everything changed, the day Clara's carefully constructed invisibility shattered, and Nathaniel chose to see her as someone worth helping, worth knowing, worth loving. They'd raise a glass together and remember how it all started, the fear and exhaustion and uncertainty, the moment when their lives intersected in the most unexpected way, the choice that changed everything. They'd remember that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst moments, if you're brave enough to accept help and strong enough to change. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever been in a place where you needed someone to see you and help you, remember that your story isn't over yet. Healing is possible. Happiness is possible. Love is possible. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise. And if you're in a position to help someone else, do it without hesitation. You never know how that simple act of kindness might transform a life. Life has a beautiful way of bringing people together exactly when they need each other most. Clara needed someone to stand up for her, to show her she deserved better, to believe in her when she couldn't believe in herself. Nathaniel needed someone to remind him why success mattered, why kindness was more valuable than any business deal, why building a life was more important than building an empire. They saved each other in the ways that counted most, and that, ultimately, is what love is supposed to be. Not one person rescuing another like in fairy tales, but 2 people choosing to walk through life together, supporting each other through hard times and celebrating together during good times, believing in each other when belief is hard, building something beautiful from whatever broken pieces they started with. We're all a little bit broken. We've all been hurt in ways that shaped and changed us. But that brokenness doesn't have to define our future. What defines us is what we do next. Whether we close ourselves off or dare to trust again, Whether we stay invisible or allow ourselves to be seen, whether we accept help or insist on struggling alone until we collapse under the weight, Clara chose to be seen. Nathaniel chose to see her. And that choice, made in a moment of crisis on a morning that started like any other, changed the trajectory of both their lives forever. Thank you for watching this journey with Clara and Nathaniel. If their story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about love, healing, redemption, and the transformative power of human kindness. Drop a comment telling me what lesson you're taking away from this, or share your own story of unexpected kindness that changed your life. And always remember, no matter what you've been through or where you've been, you deserve happiness, you deserve safety, you deserve love, you deserve to be seen and valued and respected. Don't ever settle for anything less. Your story isn't over. The best chapters might still be waiting ahead, just around the corner, in the places and moments you least expect. Sometimes all it takes is one person choosing to see you, one act of kindness, one moment of courage to change everything.